Thank you for that introduction. Unmasking Imposters by Debugging Doubt. This is going to be a really interesting conversation, and I actually have a little sidebar before we get started. So my son, when I told him about the talk, I kind of gave him a little bit of idea on the topic that we'll be covering, and he was like, yo, you should do the talk about Among Us. Has anybody ever played this game Among Us? Yeah, have you seen it? So I was like, all right, let's see how well I do. So hopefully I'll let me know if I check the box or not, all right? So a little about me. As mentioned, I'm the founder and CEO of the Tech Hustle. It's a movement that's really trying to change the mindset of everyone, because I want to come to a conference. When I look around the audience, I see more people that look like me, that we can really embrace their differences and diversity, like was mentioned by the last speaker, but truly just change the mindsets. And one of the things that we have to do in changing the mindset is unmasking anyone with that feeling of imposter. Now, for me, a little bit about my backstory. I've been in the field of engineering for about 20 years now. I started way back in 2002. I'm one of those that don't have a college degree, so I didn't go to an Ivy League. I'm a first generation Haitian American, so I come from a very diverse background, meaning that I have a lot up against me. But one of the cool things that, I don't know, some of you may know, is that I actually work for this really cool social media company. I don't know if y'all know it. It's the one with the little blue bird. Have you ever heard of that one before? Actually, Twitter 1.0 is the one that I used to work for. And I actually worked on the compute platform team, managing one of the world's largest compute clusters, running a software called Aurora Mesos. Has anybody ever heard of Aurora Mesos? Mesos? Yeah, maybe 1, 2, 3. So it is kind of the predecessor to Kubernetes. How many of y'all heard of Kubernetes? All right, everybody should be raising their hand, right? And it's one of those orchestration systems that really allows you to scale your infrastructure massively. And if y'all didn't hear, Elon was talking about how big we built it over there, because it became extremely massive. But one of the most challenging things we had managing that infrastructure is hiring engineers, keeping engineers, because there's this thing that's burning in our environment. And I know that imposter syndrome is a term that a lot of you may have heard, but has anybody ever felt imposter syndrome or felt like an imposter? Raise your hand, right? That's the majority of people in this room. And the key thing that imposter syndrome, in terms of that feeling, is you're feeling inadequate. Sometimes you feel like, yo, I got here because I was lucky, right? They pulled my name out of a hat. Or you're feeling the fear of failure. We just learned that failure is the way that we learn. Imagine if you fear failure, right? So much so that it actually creates an environment where you may actually experience burnout. Anybody's experienced burnout? I experienced burnout. I have to step away from it, right? But also, imagine if you don't even like your job, right? It's like job satisfaction. Like, why in the world do I come to work every day to put on a mask to hide what I really feel inside, and I don't feel myself? So imagine somebody like me that's been involved in this industry since 2002, how many rooms, how many tables I've sat at, and I'm the only one that looks like this. I'm the only one that talks like this. I'm the only one that moves like this, because nobody moves like Bobby D. But even with all of that swag or that confidence, I still have that feeling like an imposter. And one of the things that are going to be key in this talk today is different practices, exercises, and debug strategies that you all can implement in your organization so everybody feel like they are among us. I'm going to mention it a few times, all right? And most of the time, what are we doing? We're pointing at this person, pointing at the person. Now, that's the imposter, right? And most of the times, we're expecting individuals to get over this feeling of feeling like an imposter. I want to change that conversation. I want us to shift the focus, because truly, if you just change that perspective and the team creates an inclusive environment, a supportive environment, I tell you, I promise you, I have a 95% chance that we will remove the feeling of impostership, because now you're going to feel like you're part of the crew. Now, one of the more challenging things that working in an environment like Twitter is scale, infrastructure-wise, right? When I'm talking about Twitter's infrastructure, I'm talking about one of our clusters or zones ran 500,000 containers. That's just one, right? in terms of node-wise, we're running hundreds of thousands of nodes inside of a data center, right? And if you didn't know, Twitter didn't run, at least 1.0, didn't run in AWS and GCP, but we built all of that in-house. So that's building data centers, that's building hardware, that's even running and managing the operating system. And then I mentioned to you about the orchestration system. That was all open source, so we were contributing to a community, right? But the biggest challenge is how do we get newer engineers into our environment so that they feel like they are part of the crew, right? So we used to have this really cool practice. It was existing before I joined the team, and it's something that just changed the game when I first experienced it myself. And it's really based on the idea of managing that large infrastructure, but feeling like you can actually manage it when the fire alarm turns on, right? It's like, what do you do when pager duty goes off? Everybody knows what that pager duty sound is, right? Y'all heard that before, right? Some of y'all, maybe? But in general, that almost caused me a heart attack just thinking about what it sounds like. But imagine if you're the primary on call managing one of the world's largest compute cluster, how do you deal with it? So we had a practice that we had in our group. It's called red and blue. I'm going to get more in detail about the red and blue exercise, but think of it like a war games where the red team versus the blue team. Now, the red team is mostly senior engineers, staff engineers like myself that have been around the block a few times. And then the blue teams will also have senior level engineers, but newer engineers, interns. And in a situation, anybody that joined our team had to go through this exercise before they became validated to go on call, to be primary or secondary. Now, this exercise consists of running through scenarios that the red team documents and kind of provides validation of why we should run this exercise. One of those exercises, one of the speakers actually had me laughing, is one little bit change. We actually shut down a whole cluster before in 2019. Y'all probably experienced it, but it was because we put in something like, hey, shut this container down. That container didn't exist, so it shut everything down, right? So it's like practicing those scenarios so that you understand what you would do when that fire alarm comes on. And actually developing a way that this exercise unintentionally actually caused us to have an environment where we did not have imposters no more. That wasn't the original intent of it. It was intent for us to make everybody comfortable with managing such a large-scale system. But after somebody like me getting into the team and understanding the value behind it, I was like, yo, there could be some debugging strategies that we can introduce to really change our engineers' mindset so that this exercise is just not an exercise for us to be prepared for on call, but also really just highlight some attributes that I guarantee imposter syndromes or that feeling of an imposter basically goes away. One of those things is your diverse skill sets and embracing your individual strengths. Now, I didn't mention my role at Twitter, and maybe y'all saw it on the last slide. I actually was a site reliability engineer. Any SREs in here? SRE? Yeah, a few. SRE, site reliability engineer. Basically, the way I describe it is we are the people that if the site goes down, we're running around fixing this thing and bringing it up, right? And being a site reliability engineer for a tier 0 service like the platform infrastructure that I was talking about, there is a unique type of skill set that you bring to the table. Highlighting that specific skill set or that diverse skill set is something that once everybody knew that I was an SRE, oh, you understood how configuration management works, you understand how computers talk to each other, and you also know how to read and write code. That individuality brought me to light. Like now I have a role on this team. So calling out those diverse skill sets is one key, but also I have a diverse background, right? I'm somebody from South Florida that moves a little different, right? But they brought that to light. And once they did that, it made my feeling of being a part of the crew even more embracing, right? These are simple things that you can introduce in your team by just highlighting their individualities, right? Because that knowledge, skill set, and support is ultimately what we want to introduce. Now, our next strategy we're going to talk about, and this is something when I wrote the slide, I was like, you already know this. Team collaboration. Yes, team collaboration and fostering team collaboration. But the idea of team collaboration is open communication, trust, and creating a safe space, right? If you're in an environment where communication is tough, like I'm afraid to send her an email because I don't know what they're going to say. I'm afraid to send that person an email or send them a chat message because I don't know. I want the communication to be open. So how's your weekend? Send them a message. That's how open that feeling should be. And during this exercise, guess what we practice? We practice a Slack room dedicated specifically for the incident. We practice even Jack getting into the Slack room and saying, yo, how is ads looking, right? And it's more or less just creating that environment so that we all feel comfortable about our communication, our ability to communication amongst the team. Now, team collaboration, I want you to feel like you're on the team, like the picture there with the Among Us characters, right? After we ran this exercise, we had interns that used to go through this exercise with us. Before they went to the exercise, they were so timid. They would be behind their laptops during meetings and be like, yo, I hope they don't call my name. To where after we ran this exercise, you'll see them inside the meeting room Monday morning with their feet up like, yo, I finally made it type stuff, right? And that's the type of feeling that I want our engineers to feel when they are effective in this exercise, because that really bonds the team. Now, the cherry on top for all of this, and when I'm thinking about putting together the strategies, is celebrating, creating an empathy or a place for empathy and inclusivity. Now, the way that I'm really thinking about this is when we ran this exercise, there used to be a chant I used to chant all the time to the engineers. Even during incidents, you'll hear me walking around the office chanting a little bit. I'm looking forward to a moment. I'm looking forward to a moment that I'm going to create a space so that we can all feel like we're a part of the crew, right? The chant that I used to chant was like, yo, all I'm looking forward to are the drinks afterwards. Because all we want to do is sit down, hang out, let our hairs down, really just let that stress go and talk some war stories. One of the things that happens after the exercise, and this is what's the cherry on top for everyone to feel like they're part of the crew, is that now I'm sitting across from engineers that have dealt with those same incidents that I've basically fixed, right? Or I'm sitting across the aisle from somebody else that when I say, oh, yeah, we probably shouldn't make that change because it possibly have an impact, they understand what I mean now, right? Because they went through that exercise and we've created a space for that. Now, this drinks after space, right? It's one thing that I really feel like it solidifies the thoughts of me not being a part of the crew. Because when I go and have drinks, it's not just the members of the team, but we also invite management and directors. And we're more or less really just bringing that barrier down. And this is the part of the exercise that after I put it together, I even felt like, man, I didn't even know the person that was sitting next to me until we went through the mud, fought this fight together in terms of war, and then we sat down and we dap each other up. Like, that's my team member now, right? That's the crew, right? But being that we're at a leadership conference, one thing that I want to make sure I highlight, your roles as leaders, especially on the IC side of the table, is making sure that you model these inclusive behaviors, encouraging a collective mindset. Now, I'm going to give you a quick story of what I mean by this in terms of just modeling this, right? Besides the red and blue exercise that we were talking before, as a leader, if I'm in a meeting and there's a topic being spoken on, and my team members already knew this because I used to do it whenever there was somebody in the environment that I I think they might feel like they're an imposter, is that I would wait for us to get to the end of the meeting and somebody says, or the speaker would be like, all right, does anybody have questions? I used to raise my hand. And most of the time, because I'm a senior member of the team, everybody's waiting for me to drop a really nice question, challenge everybody and stuff like that. And I used to have this way of saying like, hey, so-and-so, I don't really understand how A plus B equals C. That was like a trigger word amongst us because they knew exactly what I meant when I said A plus B equals C. It was meaning that somebody amongst us did not know what y'all was talking about. That was also the trigger word for people to be like, oh, let me explain it. Let me volunteer my services so that I can make sure that everybody feels like they're part of the group. As leaders, we have to be visual and visualize or be mindful of the impact that what we're talking about if everybody's on the same page. And then the other thing about leadership, which has anybody taken their team out to drinks and, have a good time and hang out? Raise your hand if you have, right? One thing that I will let you know is that because you are the most senior person on the team, most of the time you got to be able to take that the tab and collect the check. So my idea is make sure that you get a corporate card before you go celebrate this event. Because as a senior leader of the team, I usually always invite a manager or at least 2 directors for them to have this experience and see what it means for us to hang out and really bond as a team. Now, the key takeaways that we're going to talk about throughout this conversation, I've, used the Among Us characters to kind of make you all laugh and maybe a few things, but I really want to make sure I'm making this a serious point, especially about this feeling of imposter syndrome. Because you all are leaders. That means you're going to have younger engineers join your organization, new grads, interns, maybe 3 or 4 or 5 years in the industry, and they will not feel like they know what they're doing. Remember, we're managing hyperscaled infrastructure. I know your code base has thousands of lines of code. Can you imagine the first day you check that out and then you get a ticket from Jira and says, hey, we need you to go fix this bug? That feeling is something that we all have to be mindful of. And that feeling of imposter syndrome should be shifted away from the individual getting over this and more or less having a team create an environment so that everybody feels like they belong, right? The next key takeaway is that type of exercise. I gave you an example of red and blue and a few things that we did in meetings before to kind of like make people feel like, number one, that they are part of the team, but also leaders identifying it. But the key thing here is that embracing each individual strength uplifts them. For some reason, just acknowledging uplifts. When's the last time you've seen someone on your team that you don't even know where they're from? You don't know that they speak another language, right? Or their background, right? Just acknowledging that changes the dynamic. And remember, team collaboration, there's nothing more great than rubbing shoulders side by side with your teammates. And then don't forget about that space of inclusivity to create, to celebrate, right? And the last thing for managers, and leaders, I apologize, is that your roles as leaders are not only to be effective at the keyboard, designing, creating these large-scale systems, managing millions of dollars, but also recognizing how valuable you are to be able to recognize behaviors, human behaviors, just like systems, right? We see systems, we monitor metrics. We don't really have metrics to monitor on that, but definitely leaders definitely should be able to see it. And don't forget to get that corporate card. Please don't forget that. So thinking about thinking about unmasking imposters and empowering people and engineers to scale, right? We mentioned earlier that I talked last year at Lead Dev New York, and I want to say thank you all, Lead Dev, for inviting me to come out here. This is a big checkbox for me. But the talk that I had at Lead Dev last year, definitely check it out online, is about saving inefficiency challenges or solving inefficiency challenges at data center scale. Because I worked in an environment that I was seen, because I worked in an environment that they purposely pushed me more closer to the group of engineers, I became a super engineer. I became an engineer that worked on a project that only took about 6 months and ended up saving Twitter $122 million. Like, I would not have been able and feel confident enough to do those type of things and throw these ideas on the board if I didn't have an environment that I felt like I was a part of the crew. So, look at that right there. Everybody has their own individuality. And just like Twitter, birds flock together, we fly together, kind of like soaring and fighting against the wind and all that good stuff. But in general, just keep in mind that you are working towards embracing everyone's individual contributions and definitely positioning yourselves so that you can build engineers at hyperscale or at scale, super scale. The last thing I want to briefly go over is this topic about imposter syndrome, talking about red and blue, really just enlightening my community on what technology and engineering has affected my life is a newsletter that I run. So definitely look forward. I look forward to new subscribers. And in general, this newsletter is really foundationally off of the idea that if I can do it, you can do it. And there's no doubt that I know that you all can be great leaders because I've had a chance to shine at least once or twice. All right? And with that, I'm quickly going to close out with a thank you. But before then, I just want to let y'all know that that's the link, thetechhustle.com. So make sure y'all follow me and definitely tweet at me. I know y'all see my handle there. Even though I'm not at Twitter, I still represent and hold it down because I've done some great work. And 90% of what I worked on is still working there anyway. So it's all my sisters anyway. But anyways, I do want to say thank you all for inviting me. Lead Dev, I really appreciate you. All the speakers that came before and the speakers tomorrow, we're very much looking forward to all of the loud claps that you're going to have. And the last thing, London, I really appreciate you. If y'all see me in these streets, holla at your boy. It's Bobby D.